welcome all of you and thank you for coming. And we especially want to thank this morning our collectors who have loaned us their fabulous paintings that, as one collector said, this is kind of a piece of history that we're looking at, and it brings back memories from 2014, 2015, 16, 17. So I'd like to personally thank and the museum and everyone associated with this event. We'd like to thank Sharon and John Alexander, Tina and Douglas Bean, Treva and Mike Boyd, Randy and Dr. Bill Bush, Fran and Tom Gregg, Elta Joyce McAfee, Lee and Patrick Moore, the San Angelo Museum of Fine Arts. We are going to see a couple of their collection. Shirley and Mike Oliphant, Barbara and Joe Rollo, Ann and Reed Shahan, Camille Santry and Ike Sugg, and Deborah and Russ Weatherford. So thank you for supporting this event so heartily with your purchases. So now I'd like to visit with you about Don Demers, our judge. We are extremely excited to have him here this year. He was our juror last year, so last year's artists were chosen by Don. And this year, then he is awarding the artist that Tim Newton chose earlier in the year. Many of you met Tim in May. Tim, give us a shout. He was the juror for this year, and he will be our judge next year. But he couldn't resist coming back to San Angelo. And Don may be back next year anyway because he loves it here, we hope. We don't know. So, Don is from all over Maine, most recently Booth Bay, Maine. He grew up by the side of the sea. He went to art school, but after art school, started working on ships, all sorts of ships. He has just come from California, Newport Beach show, The Wild Side, and that was for a conservatory.
Catalina Island Conservancy.
Catalina Island Conservatory. He has won awards, an unprecedented amount of awards, annual awards in Mystic, Connecticut International Show for his marine paintings. But he's a master marine painter. And if you'll read around, he is considered the top realist painter in the world of any subject matter. So we are honored to be here. I've read that, so not just on Facebook either. So that he's won the top award in the members show at the Salmagundi Club in New York City, and we heard about that in May. The Art Renewal Center, he's won awards for his plein air work. He's won awards with the Outdoor Painters of America. He is a signature member of Plein Air Painters of America, a fellow of the American Society of Marine Artists, president of the American Tonalist Society, and we want to welcome him to give you what you're here for today. Thank you, Don.
Is my mic working? It is. Good. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you to everyone who's involved in this event. I have received the warmest welcome since I've been here. Got here about 3 days ago, and I just can't emphasize how friendly and accommodating all of you folks are. So thank you very much for making me feel so at home and so and given so much respect. It was very, very gratifying and meaningful. I started as a little kid with pen crayons in my hand and have had a paintbrush in my hand most of my adult life, and I just love the fact that my journeys as an artist deliver me to places like this. Tim and I, with our dear friends, we've talked about it recently, and just so grateful for the opportunities that come our way because of our love for art and this community that we all share. So, so thank you all, and thank you for coming today, both artists and collectors. Uncharacteristically, I actually have a few prepared remarks. I oftentimes do this extemporaneously, but I had the day yesterday to get to know these paintings. I spent the day getting to know them. They're like getting to know people. You're introduced to them and you spend time absorbing them and seeing their nuance come forth. So because I had the day yesterday, I prepared some remarks. So I'm just going to refer to my laptop a little bit as I get going because there's some things I want to cover and I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So we're here to celebrate the artists that are in the room and to acknowledge and thank the collectors. I don't mean to be too awkward, but just because I want to address the collectors, could I have would you raise your hand if you're here as a collector?
Yay, collectors!
Well, Charlie's right, because you complete our circle of creativity. if we don't have you to receive what we create, we can't do this as a vocation. So there's a symbiotic relationship and a real affection that we grow for each other. And it's important that we acknowledge that relationship, that you do complete our circle. My hope today, while I'm making a few remarks, is to the collectors, is to raise your level of visual fluency, your knowledge of your collection, to have a greater understanding and appreciation of the work that's already in your collection or works that you will potentially acquire, perhaps even tonight or tomorrow during this event. I think, hopefully, if I do my job well, that you will have a deeper understanding of the images that are hanging on your walls, and you'll grow to appreciate them more. I don't want to stand up here and share with you my likes and dislikes. They have, my personal tastes have no room in here. What I want to do is examine the anatomy of the artwork and share the anatomy, the constructs of visual art. So let's have a conversation today if we can. Conversations are much more intriguing than monologues are. Dialogues are better than monologues, I should say. So I want to encourage, especially my colleagues, my artist friends and colleagues here, if you've got something that you can contribute. I'm just one guy. I've spent a long time studying this. I've spent a long time doing it in linear education. And if I say something, miss something, I'd really love to have you contribute. This podium is not just mine. So please feel free to join in with the conversation. I welcome any comment as long as it's complete accord with what I say. That's the only criteria. So, I thought you might be the first one out of the gate. So, let's do a quick recap on plein air painting because I think it can be misunderstood. Plein air painting is not a style of painting, and it hasn't only been around for 20 years. It started in the mid-1500s, and it was a form of study for centuries. Agostino Tassi was one of the first practitioners in Italy. He handed the baton off to Claude Lorraine, who was considered the grandfather of plein air work, again, a form of study. And so it goes back to the mid-1500s. It then got passed on to various schools, the Barbizon school, and then it was even taught at the École des Beaux-Arts back in the 1700s. John Constable was a famous practitioner. But all of those works were preparatory works for seeing what natural effects were outside. Eventually, the first group of painters that really started to form into finished paintings outside were the French Impressionists, although the Barbizon school did some as well. So that's what we get to be, that's the most familiar manifestation of plein air work. It's based on what we've seen from French Impressionism. But as you can see from these paintings and from the works that will be in the show, their styles range far and wide. Many agendas, many motives, many reasons for doing it. So it migrated to the United States, and then art colonies of plein air painters popped up from Gloucester, Massachusetts, to Bucks County, to Taos, New Mexico, to Laguna Beach. I'm missing a lot. The Hoosiers in Indiana. It's been a part of our culture for a long time. So I want to touch upon that. You know what I'm going to see if I can do? Put some informality. Could I get a glass of water? Lemon, no ice, please. Oh, perfect. Thanks. Excuse me. There. I didn't want my consonants to start sticking. So now I want to celebrate the painters here for a second. Painting is an extremely private process. I call it solitary refinement. But if you take a private process, if you become a plein air painter, you take a private process and you do it in a public setting. It takes a tremendous amount of courage. It takes a tremendous amount of fortitude, tremendous amount of focus. You are really stacking the deck high when you become a plein air painter. You're taking your most intimate desires and intentions, and you're also taking your most intimate flaws and failings, and you're showing them to the world. And so I take my hat off to every one of you who do this. You work so hard and so diligently. A lot of us have received the comment, oh, you're so talented. That's nice to hear, but that's not what really means a lot to us. What means a lot to us is that we've worked really hard and we've developed our skills. And painting is not an art. Painting is a craft. If you get good enough at your craft, you may be able to express yourself. And on good occasions, elevate that craft to the level of art. So most of what you all do is just plain hard work and a lot of attention. And I wanted to acknowledge that. So there's a how and a why to painting. There's a how and a why to everything. Early in our careers, we are interested in how. How do I paint a tree? How do I make that house look like it's got perspective on it? How do I paint a flower? Eventually, as you mature as a painter, the question of why comes into play. A painting is nothing more than a delivery system for an emotion or an idea. The delivery system is the how, and the emotion or the idea or the intellectual thought is the why. And so those components have to be present in the full resolution of a painting. So now we get down to the practical aspects of this whole thing, the elements and the method of plein air painting. I had my friend Bill Farnsworth, I asked him for that blank canvas. When you look at these paintings today, and when you go to the show, and from now on, if you're a collector, I want you to take a moment and remind yourself that that's how it started. It started in a total vacuum. Nothing is there. And there are so many decisions that every one of these painters have to make between that and that. And it's an extensive process of intellect, methodology, emotional awareness. So it's always important to pay attention to that. One last thing, and then we'll get into discussing. So this is why I think that a lot of plein air painters maybe should have their heads examined by a professional. So you go to a place, and the first thing you need is an idea and a surface that you want to put that idea on. Once you have the idea, you have to create a composition. Within that composition, it's comprised of shapes, abstract shapes, geometric shapes, and values, lights and darks. Within there, simultaneous with it, depending upon the subject matter, requires draftsmanship, which requires measuring, which requires gesture. Upon that, you place color. And within that color, you have texture, thick impastos, transparent passages. And finally, your personal calligraphy is omnipresent within the piece. And if you've been successful, your original intention that you started with is manifest on a surface. Now you go outside and do it in front of people. And if artists think that they're capable of having a 90% success rate, I teach a lot and I tell them this. It is hard work, it's a process, and I think it's unrealistic to think that you will succeed at a 90-95% rate because of all those things I just mentioned. Those have to be present every time. So that's why I want you to appreciate this work so much, because that's what goes into it. So with that stage set, now we'll talk about some pictures. I wish we were intellectual abstractionists because my speech would be done and I could just show you this. Oh, please, sorry. You asked me to cue you when I dropped the ball in the first shot. So what I've done is I put just a couple of remarks down, I hope characterize and inform you about each of these paintings. Remember the how and the why of the painting. So the comments I made about this painting, the painting is an intimate celebration. It's a small scale canvas, but it's a large scale for the rose itself. So you're not paying any attention to anything else in the world except this intimate relationship between you and the rose. And there's a hierarchy of components in every painting. The first thing we see is that beautiful explosion of color coming off of that rose. It's clean, it's elegant, it's luminous, but the thing that sets it off are the dark, cool greens around it. You need that platform from which to launch the explosion that's in that painting. The psychology of that painting is one, I believe, of intimate appreciation of this thing that's found out in nature. So for a small canvas of that size, it says a lot. It shows a lot of emotion. In the why category, there's an awful lot of celebratory emotion in that picture. And its orchestration, its visual orchestration is very, very well done between those. Yes?
Do you know the actual size of that piece?
It's right here.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Hi, Neil.
Neil, not too sharp, but awful sweet.
Charlie, everyone's welcome here. So, next piece.
Wait, can I Can I say one?
Oh, yes, sure, please,
Really
please.
cool about this, the design, the diagonals. It's a big X. From the top left to the bottom right is the primary dark. Top left to bottom right, and then the direction of the rows pointing to the upper right. Just it's this real subtle delineation of shape. You can start seeing it as an X.
Right there,
It's brilliant.
and it launches that way. And diagonals, thanks Charlie, that's exactly what I wanted, contributions from the practitioners here. And in the visual language, line work is extremely important. Horizontal lines encourage pacificity and calm. Vertical lines suggest majesty and height. Diagonal lines create energy. So there's an energy in here, and I'm glad Charlie pointed it out to you. So, Hulai Chong, and she's got that painting of the railroad depot right here. The color temperature in this, of course, keys the whole painting. For those of you collectors, the color wheel, the full spectrum, there's a cool end and a warm end. The warm end is obviously the yellows and the oranges. The cool end are the blues and the greens and the purples. So she's orchestrated this to have a beautiful combination, that lime green coming down to that rose color at the horizon. There's many indications of that. You can actually see the richness much better in the original. Is this terribly annoying to anybody? No. I know football players don't like it in their eyes when they're... yeah, cats do like them. So she keyed the painting beautifully to capture the time of day. There are some latent cool tones in the roadways and the tracks, and then some of the vertical tones hosting the warmer palette in the picture. She's also done two other things in this painting that give it its mood and its atmosphere. One is she's reduced the value range. There aren't many very strong lights in the picture, and there aren't very many strong darks. So the closer the lights and darks are in a painting, the more atmosphere the painting has. The wider the value range, the more clarity the painting has. So she has put this in a veil of light here by reducing the value range. And the other thing that I think she did is she went through a transformational process in this painting. She reduced the amount of detail. Even though there are many elements in this painting, she reduced the amount of detail, say around the windows, some of the architectural details. By painting them in a slightly simpler style, she transformed them from being familiar objects that we know of to artistic elements. And once you've made that translation between the recognizable world and the painted world, then your paintings will take off. So she's very, very cognizant of doing that in this picture, and it's quite evident. If we're talking about visual language, which we can, we've got this pair of the railway signs here. This third one sets this off from being a matching pair. So there's a shape dialogue that goes on, and there's all of these series of verticals that go all the way through. Every one of us as painters have to recognize that. These two diagonals going this way with the perspective and that way with the height of the roof line as it moves up. So you've got a triangle going here. And there are other subplots as well, but that's the primary one I see. So again, lots of thoughts. In any given painting, regardless of the size, there's probably 2,000 thoughts that have to go into it. So next, please. In danger of my verbose nature, if I start running over, just come over and step on my foot or something. Are we at what, 11 o'clock or so now? So where are we now? There's a lot to talk about in this painting. Heart of the home. And by the way, one of the things I failed to mention earlier, I do things out of sequence at times, is I encourage my students to title their painting before they begin, if possible. If not, at least make a statement of intention, so that you stay focused and navigate your way toward the artistic mission that you're setting yourself on. If you meandering's fun, but you oftentimes don't end up where you intended to go. So having some clarity at the beginning of the painting. Titles are also helpful if they can usher us closer to the painting, and in this case I think it's true. The Heart of the Home is the title of this painting. So this painting, I just listed some things in here and then I'll extrapolate upon them. So there's a lot of texture in this painting, and if you get up and close to see the original, it's done with, the technique is really, really fine in this. It's starting out with very thin layers of paint, and then it's slowly built up to areas where there's scumbling, almost impasto. For those of you who are collectors, scumbling is dragging wet paint over dry. So he's got a nice textural variety in the piece, and it adds a richness to it. He's got a Mondrian-like pattern going on in here. There are, look at all these rectangles and shapes. They're absolutely everywhere. And I know they're in that scene, and yet he was able to play them up effectively in this. The geometric construction in this is pretty remarkable. I'll stay on the shape. Look at this relationship with that skylight, and obviously it aligns with this triangle. Look at these two opposing triangles. This one is light and lavender, and that is hot and sienna. And some of this is subjective analysis, admittedly, but I think that the contrast between these two is just so fascinating. This ties in with that lighting in there. There are so many subplots within this painting. The heart of the home, the fact that these are centered right down the middle of the composition gives the painting weight, and it settles it down. It's the place that you feel like you'd like to sit. And again, we're supposed to be exploitive of our subject matter. We're supposed to align our subject with our intention, and I think he's done it beautifully in this painting. And what else did I want to mention? Oh, there's a great economy of marks in this. So I don't think any of us have ever found a microwave oven to be particularly beautiful. Look at those marks. It's a visual shorthand. It's almost a Morse code. These little dashes, they're just touches that identify the knobs on that stove. That's an artist's potential. That's what we can do. We can take ordinary objects and transform them into another language. And another language that can be so enriching that this painting can actually feel more about that home than the actual place does. It's really a fascinating possibility. One last thing, and I know this from drawing, it's really easy to mess up ellipses. And just that curve on those, the draftsmanship in this picture is really well done. And the economy, the halftone and all of those chairs is the underpainting. It's the first layer of painting put down. Anyway, quite a visual feast in that picture. Any comments, criticisms? No? All right.
What size is this one, Neil?
Charlie, will you come the next time I do this? So here we have breakfast at, is it Trevis? Trevis. I knew I had a 50% chance. I got it wrong. So, in contrast to the previous painting, this is organic and lyrical. It has a flow. There's not a lot of geometry in this picture. But let me see what I made for a statement here. This is a composition that invites us to meander through the animals, the light and the shade of the meadow, and weave through the foliage. It's a clear example of lyrical rhythm, pattern, and repetition. So you can see this beautiful flow. You see it repeated over and over throughout here. And these animals, they're moving in a certain cadence. This one barely has a shadow, which suggests that it's possibly moving. This is done with such a light touch that it puts a movement into the picture. So this pattern, it weaves back and forth and gets more subtle as the scale and the depth of field, the distance, as the shapes diminish in height, they move into the distance. So we're really given a sense of movement and a sense of moving light, a sense of sound, which is extremely important in paintings. Paintings obviously present the visual sense. But if we can draw out a sense of sound, a sense of smell, probably get a sense of smell out of this one too. Any of the other emotions that can be activated through a painting is what makes a painting a representation of an experience. Most paintings, I would say, and through history have been, whether perhaps not if they're metaphorical in nature or allegorical in nature, but represent a human experience. And this painting feels to me, because of its organic flow and its handling, that it's truly representing a sensory experience of sound and movement. Plus, it's fun. I don't want to get too intellectual about the thing, because it's just a fun painting to look at. It's a joyous picture. It's fun seeing these sequentially. You see the differences in all of them, huh? I mean, look at the difference in emotion on this one from the last one we just looked at. I'm usually not nervous. I don't know why my mouth's so dry.
You're in West Texas.
That's why I live in a damp environment. Everything I own is wet. Thank you. So my comments about this, it's emotive and mysterious. You know, it draws out a strange feeling. One thing that we have to know as human beings, not only as artists, is that light is what offers us information. Darkness or shadow offers us mystery and intrigue. In a pitch black room, you are uncertain of anything in it. As soon as there's the first suggestion of light coming into the room through a cracked door, you see the crown of the back of a chair. Now you know there's a chair there. Everything else is in mystery. So when there's an unknown, there's a feeling that can draw out a feeling of unease, uncertainty. So he's certainly done that in this painting. Only in the light can we see the evidence of where we are. This draws out certain suggestions of film noir, for instance, because of it. It's also reminiscent of Hopper because of its austerity. So there's some art history that's present in this picture. Lost my spot here. There's a very interesting dynamic in this picture that I want to point out to you. It's a strong diagonal. It's not, you don't really see it as well in this, but I'm going to have to point it out to you. Again, hierarchy and chromatic intensity. There's always dialogues and levels of application, whether it's color, whether it's aggressive line work, whether it's value. But this is what he's done. He's put the strongest, coldest light in this corner, and then he chose to put this one, which is the hottest color in the scene. And he lined them right along that diagonal right there. So we get suspended between those, and all we have are these artifacts, these just suggestions of these cars. So without that spot right there, there's not nearly as much intrigue in that painting as there is when you can see those two moving back and forth across that diagonal.
I think it also has a Alfred Hitchcock theatric feel to it.
Absolutely, yeah,
And
yeah.
Hitchcock showed, that left blank area creates so much more mystery. It almost scares the hell out of you.
It does, yeah. Who's in the car? Yeah.
Who is that?
This painting asks more questions than it offers answers. And Hitchcock is a very good example of it. In fact, I think that's Jimmy Stewart. Okay, so we can move on to coming out of the, that's a fabulous painting. It is just so interesting and intriguing.
When does the bidding start?
Now, Tim, don't fight among the collectors. So the golden moment. Jason does he say Sacran?
Sacran.
I've met him I don't know how many times, but he calls me Demers instead of Demers, so they do everything. So this has a counterbalanced, a great painting, by the way. I mean, I wouldn't be talking about these. Oh, we failed to mention that these were selected. You presented them, and we went through a selection process of paintings that I thought would make an appropriate arrangement of discussion. So I wouldn't be talking about any of these paintings if I didn't have an enormous amount of respect for each and every one of them. So, my comments here, a counterbalanced composition, creating equipoise. Equipoise is a beautiful word, and boy does it apply to painting. It's an overall balance of uneven distribution of shapes and spaces. There's a funny phrase that we use in the art business called steelyard. It's a form of composition, and it came about, I think, in the 20s or 30s, when they used to actually have weights that would measure, and it was basically what we always called, in the Northeast, a seesaw, or a teeter-totter is what they call it in some places. So let me show you what Jason's done in terms of that, and then we'll get on to the other criteria. So what he did is, he's got his primary weight over here. He's got a secondary, smaller weight right there, based on the moon. And so there's an implied visual fulcrum right about in this area, right where that bend in the tracks are. So it's very, very well balanced. So I want to address that criteria, because it's that mechanism of steelyard, counterweight, equipoise in art, you see it a lot in paintings, and I would encourage you to look for it. But beside the fact that in our visual language, a circle is probably the most powerful image there is. That's arguable, but it's a very strong one. So the extra weight of that not only comes from its shape, but also not only comes from its luminosity, but also its shape.
That's a great sign.
What's that?
That's a great sign.
It is. Mm-hmm.
It's irregular, it's
Yeah.
almost blinding.
The moon.
All right, very good too.
I didn't want to get celestially nitpicky with you. So we have primarily a cool palette in this picture with warm punctuation marks. And again, the golden moment is a work. I listened to the title. I listened to the title. I read the title and paid attention to it. So it's primarily a cool palette, but it's got warm punctuation marks in it. And I refer to them almost as musical notes. There's a cadence to them. So this, better seen in the original than it is here, but this is all primarily cool, all of these passages. Then there's this sequence of warm verticals, just like musical notes. So that's a loud note. Then there's a succession of quick notes afterwards. Then there's a reprieve. And you move over here, there's a spike in the musical, in the sheet music, and then a conclusion over here. It's very interesting the way he used those warms to move across that space. And there's another axiom in our business, and it's called the minority rules on a canvas. So if a canvas is primarily of cool notes, then the warm notes become all the more important, as opposed to having an even distribution of warms and cools. So he's employed that approach. And of course, the last thing he did, which I didn't even mention yet, is just a great depth of field. His perspective lines are excellent in terms of that rapid succession. Down that line falls to a vanishing point on the horizon, then up at a steep angle. These head off in a direction to a vanishing point up in about the same area. So, pretty well composed painting. The last thing he did is he made a beautiful painting out of an ugly subject. So, there's one thing I tell my students, and all my friends and colleagues agree, that the better we become plein air painters, the worse drivers we are. We're just distracted all the time. We don't need a telephone. We're distracted by school buses and stop signs and overpasses, and everything that comes within our visual purview. What's that? Exactly. So, unless anybody wants to contribute, well, yes.
Before that goes away.
Yeah.
Keep that up. Now, for the collectors, looking at these two images, you've got the medium up here, the JPEG, basically, that we always look at on computers. But then, this was true with John's painting earlier, too. The actual painting themselves have a certain quantity, they just have a certain weight.
Yes, very much so.
It gets lost in the imagery. That's why it's so important to be able to, in this case, look at the original painting.
Yes. Boy, am I glad you pointed that out, because there is a quietude to that picture, certainly.
And John said the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you for filling in these blanks for me. That's very helpful. Now that I'm out here looking at the original again, I know why I wrote minority rules, because look at the size of that canvas, and look at how much of space that occupies. It's not even an inch square. So and all the rest of it sleeps, as you said. Thanks. So, Richard Sneer is a pretty good watercolorist. His technique is exquisite. He's got so much control, so much delicacy, such a command of the medium. That in itself is enough to admire this picture. In addition to that, there's a lot of subtleties in this picture. And by the way, let's talk about draftsmanship for just a second. There's somewhat of an instinct for some plein air painters, because of the frantic nature of working outside and having about a 2 to 3 hour window. They want to skip over some of the fundamentals and get to the bright color and the gestural brushwork and pass over their work as draftsmen. Well, this is a classic example of that you don't have to do that. and you don't have to get the painting done necessarily in 2 hours. So I think it's important to remember that draftsmanship plays a big role in plein air painting. Sometimes it gets overlooked. But here, the consideration, I can feel the time and the pace at which he painted this. You know, there's just a lot of care and consideration. So there's a lot of very subtle temperature shifts in here, but not strong value shifts. So you got some cool purples, some warm yellow lights here. So the value structure is not strong, but the temperature shift is evident. So that gives a soft, dappled light, really draws out the feeling of the day. So you've always got those mechanisms to work with: a value shift, the temperature shift, the strength of an edge or not. And there's something else he did here that is inclusive. There's a light panel in the foreground of this picture, and it would have been isolated and separated from the rest of the painting had he not included that shadow right there. So much of what makes a good painting is what you're not aware of, all of the decisions. Thomas and I were talking the other day about how many times Sargent scraped his canvases. So we see the magic of the final resolution. We don't see the artist pulling their hair out.
16 times once.
16 times?
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. So if he scraped, I'll scrape. So many decisions that can be made, so many pitfalls, so many wrong roads that go down in the creation of a painting. And Richard was so careful in this painting in the way he constructed it. And finally, the psychology, the why, not the how. I've been talking about the how in this picture. The why in this is this intimate voyeuristic view of this house. It's so tucked in there. It's so private that you're not seeing the entire house. You're peering around this foliage in at this little speckling of light in that mid-ground where those windows are. I just think it's just a beautiful painting.
And the watercolors, I think there's not as much appreciation generally in the art market for watercolor as there is oil, and yet we all, as artists, we see that you can't mess up. You can't scrape this down.
No.
So every thought has to be planned way ahead.
You have to be at least a couple steps ahead of yourself. You have to know what's coming next.
Got a beautiful little orange note to the upper left,
Right there.
around
Yep.
the gateway of the trees.
So here we've got wet and wet. Let's talk about that, what Bill brought up. Wet and wet technique. Here's some dry on wet where the edge and the silhouettes of the foliage appears. Here's a little dry over wet, so that combination. And remember, when Richard is painting this house, he had to load up a brush with that lavender tone and just keep moving with it. You can't stop and put your hand on your chin and wonder if it's going to come out okay. There's an urgency to this medium that is really critical.
Sargent once said, painting in watercolor is making the best of an emergency.
Who said that?
Sargent.
Sargent said, oh. Yeah, that guy, he could paint watercolor too. Wow. Yeah.
You know, Don, it's true of all of the images you're showing on the big screen, but I'm looking at this, especially everyone that's in this room needs to go up after your talk and look at this original in person.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much different. This is beautiful. This is incredible. In the original, it's just so rich.
It is. It's rich and there's an intimacy to it. And look at his graphite lines. Look at the drawing he put in there originally to secure the architecture in the picture. So good that we have the originals here to do. I mean, what a difference. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go to another watercolor right now, if we may. Francesco Fontana. He gets 5 marks for just his name. So, look at the explosiveness of this. This is exciting. It feels like the energy of the night. And when your medium matches your mood, when your medium matches your emotion, boy, that's when painting really takes off. So I've commented that this is a classic use of watercolor in its fluid, most fluid fashion. A technique that emphasizes the mood and the energy. The plan design, not only in this watercolor, but in every watercolor, as Bill just mentioned, the plan design in a watercolor is critical. And it requires the unification of shapes. what that does is gives you a great design opportunity. I work in watercolor as well, and it's always good for me to do so because it heightens my awareness of my design. And I'll point out what I mean by that in just a second as soon as I stumble through the rest of my remarks here. Yeah, the plan design utilizes the unification of shapes, and I can point it out with these. You can see it possibly a little bit better on the original, but there's this shape right here. That strong, it's a little bit cropped out on the projected image. That strong blue shape is really definitive in this picture. It leaps across to this, where this drops down, and all of that gets unified all the way around here, and then it gets fragmented. But you could actually take and follow that shape all the way through the picture. It even takes a detour down here if you choose, but there are paths in there. Another area of unification is the only thing that separates that pickup truck from that building are the darks. All the lights are the same. This is all connected to that building back there. That's watercolor planning right there. And it creates unification in design. So he's got a strong dynamic design going on. He's got an emotional engine behind his intention. You can see it. And then he loaded up that brush, and he is moving that thing fast. Picking up an edge here, losing an edge there, just moving around this thing very, very frenetically. And because our paintings end up looking the way we felt. And I paint outside in the winter a lot in Maine, down to about 8 or 10 degrees. And boy, do my paintings look cold when I get done. It really, really shows your emotion. You can't lie on these surfaces. If you're committed and dedicated, then it shows up. If you're immersed, we have to subject ourselves to our subject. That's where the soul comes from. If we're removed, separated, and objective all the time in our artistic process, it's not going to show up on the surface. So you have to fall into it. And boy, he fell into it here. Really, really shows up.
You know, excuse me. You caught it too, because this man is from Italy, and that was his first day in Texas, and first night on the concert was titled, "You're Seeing That Joy."
Exactly, precisely. He's manifested. I love the phrase that people say, oh, he or she really captured it. Well, that's what we're doing. We're taking something in the moving, multi-dimensional, multi-sensory world that we're experiencing. We're capturing it on a piece of canvas or paper. It's a remarkable experience and a rewarding experience. If you can arrest life for a moment and grab it so it's there, and so it's not everything is fleeting by. It's one of the greatest joys of this. I did learn just about everything that I'm dedicated to in painting on the side of a beer can. There was the statement that said, no deposit, no return. So if you don't invest yourself in the work, it's not going to show itself back up again. So here's another painting of Jason's. This is a dynamic component that's evident in a lot of painting. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Andrew Wyeth's work, but he is a great practitioner of what I'm about to mention. And that is, this painting makes strong use of the combination of 3 dimensions and silhouettes. So what silhouettes do is give graphic strength to a painting. What 3 dimensions do is give the painting its illusion of depth. So what he's done here, see if I have anything else I want to include before I go. Let's talk about that, and then I can talk about the use of negative shape. So here's the combination of 3 dimensions. This has 3 dimensions because it moves back in perspective. It's got highlights and shadows. It's got dimensional form in it. The tree is nothing more than a big silhouetted shape. So the tree adds the silhouette to the picture, and it sets the stage, or it's the backdrop, if you will, for the area of dimension. So this, again, this gives it the illusion of depth. That gives it its graphic strength. His use of this negative space. So we have, for those of you collectors, there's positive space, there's negative space, and there's something I call benign space. It's something that just sort of lies in between somewhere. But here we have a positive shape. This is obviously positive with the activity of this palm, but this is all an area of rest in peace. So the eye moves up here, it swings around, it goes to that very active area with that picket fence with those radiating palm fronds, and then it's all supported by the silhouette. So there's a lot of strong compositional components in that picture. Plus, it's got a good lighting effect. I didn't bother to emphasize that because I wanted to show you those other anatomical components. So where are we now?
20 by 12.
I thought you'd know the size of the next one. You're coming along. You'll keep taking your vitamins. This is one unusual, unique painting. Fascinating painting called Night Owl. So my comments here are the subtle value shifts that create the mystery in this. And the unification of the girl and the background are very suggestive, so as to evoke and not to describe. That goes back to what I had said earlier about there's no information in shadows, there's mystery in shadows. There's an interesting relationship between the girl's features and the door frame facade of shapes. So right in here, that shape, forearm, the hand, and if you look at these shapes on the facade, there's a relation. Look at this. Boom, 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 boom. They're tied to each other all the way through, that little relationship of shapes. The other shapes in here are much grander, much larger, and these, of course, move toward her in this. So what you do not put in a painting is every bit as important as what you include. And I think Neil's dedication to the mystery and intrigue of the subject, and then the restraint he used in his visual components is what makes this painting so mysterious and evocative. Do I have anything else here? Do you have anything you'd like to say, Neil, in your defense?
Great model.
It was a long.
Very good model, I heard, yes. Yeah.
Yes, good model.
Precisely. Very good, Bill. Yeah, soft and missing edge is really important in this. Right behind you, Thomas. I don't know that person.
Hey, Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't she forget her brushes when she went out to paint a nocturne, so she modeled for you?
No, she had her brushes. She got too tired to paint, I think.
Oh, that's what it was.
Sir, did you have a question, Kim?
Yeah, I did. I think what jumps out to me on this piece is like the amount of like economy of strokes, of brush strokes, and the transparency between the opaque and the transparent, translucent. And I'm seeing it in the original, but it really comes out in the slide. But it just shows a real like restraint, and that's really, really nice to see.
It does, yeah.
Really, once you'd be tempted to fuss all those architectural details quite a bit more, and I think Neil's done a great job of holding back.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if he had developed an advanced, rendered any of the components in that, the more clarity, the more information, the less mystery. It would not have been in service to his idea. So you're right, his limited, and there's another component. This started back during the Renaissance with chiaroscuro, the light and dark effect. Thin passages being utilized in shadow areas, so there's air and mystery in them, as opposed to where the light forms begin to emerge, there's more impasto in the paint. Neil's a great, not only great artist, he's a great craftsman, and his skills were well used in the painting of this. Yeah, thanks for that contribution.
You know, as a collector, as a non-artist, this painting drew me from the very beginning. When I first saw it a couple of years ago, and although I didn't understand all of the nuances that you described, it's absolutely there. It absolutely drew me in because of the mysteriousness of the painting, and it's one that it's dark and nocturne, but what's she doing there?
What do you think she's doing there?
Well done. Anyway, this one reached out and grabbed me from the very beginning, and I think it's because of all those elements that built in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, again, this painting offers more questions than it provides answers. And there are paintings that come to you. This painting you have to go to. You're drawn into this, almost like you do. You want to know what she's doing there.
Yeah, I like the narrative of starting a story and letting it collect attention.
Precisely.
And a local collector could finish it because she's right next door to the bordello that was there earlier year. So you know what that really is, you know what it
Really? That adds to the narrative, doesn't it? It is. It's interesting when we can do that. When,
I didn't know that when I painted it.
the plot thickens. Okay, now we'll go on to Charlie Hunter's Milk Barns at Mims Ranch. So, Charlie, you redirect my comments at any time you feel you need to. But these are my objective thoughts about Charlie's work in this painting. Charlie's technique and his limited use of color often suggest a transience. Is the object there or not? Has time passed? There again, I'm using the word mystery a lot, but there's that component of time lapse in his pictures to question the era, the moment. It's very thought-provoking. I know that his work often draws out nostalgic sensibilities, and I find that to be extremely intriguing and fascinating. The composition is really strong and daring in this. He uses homeostasis, which is the balance of interconnected objects. That barn is a clear example of homeostasis. Each similar shape, but they're connected by that roof, and there's a comfortable balance where they sit. But that can lead to a static composition, but this is not a static composition, and I want to point out to you why I believe it is not. So the daring part was doing something that symmetrical and that strong on the canvas. The composition isn't static because he has used horizontality on the left and verticality on the right to break that homeostasis up. And he's also used repetition in the trees on the right and the internal view of the trees in the center. So if you look at these two shapes are very similar. But look at the position of the windows and some of this fence line. That shape moves horizontally. That shape moves horizontally. That fence moves horizontally. This placement of that window is critical in that composition. Look at the difference between those two shapes and their position. That's what sets off the symmetry in that painting. Now obviously this sets off some of the symmetry too by having this backdrop of trees behind this barn. This foliage is low over on this side. But then we get a repetition of this little vignette right here. So he takes us and we walk through those barns whether we want to or not. He just leads us in with those two scales, that repetition. This horizontality, that horizontality, these marks right here, all lead to that relationship. This diagonal is pretty interesting and intriguing in the middle of this. So we have this sneak view through the middle. So those are and the restraint and color just evoke so much mood in Charlie's work. Do you have anything you want to redirect about this, Charlie?
No, I'm impressed as well.
Good. That was my intention.
I think Charlie's work evokes a burning fuse.
Exactly, sure. Yeah, the technique is fascinating and unique.
And the only thing I toss in is my analogy to the limited use of color. I liken it to, in fiction writing, that just because we have access to all these adjectives doesn't mean we have to use them. To me, color is adjectival. And you can write like Faulkner and have a sentence that's a page and a half long, or you can try to write like Hemingway or Raymond Carver and have, how do you tell a story so it's just sinew and bone? So by putting by having it primarily monochromatic with just a couple of color notes, loads the import of those color notes proportionately. So
That is extremely interesting and astute. Wow, that's fascinating. Sort of the opposite way that I talk. That is very informative. Yeah, Thomas.
I hate to follow up him, but I was just talking about this painting, which was second winner last year, to someone this morning, and I remembered that negative space between the two barns being mathematically dead center, and I described it that way because that's what locked the composition down. It's not, obviously. It's the tree behind. That little tree on the other side of the barn is mathematically
Look at the importance of that.
Yeah. And that's usually taught to us artists. That's a no-no. This guy gets away with it. All the time he gets away with that.
Though, if you're a good composer and an intelligent painter, both of which Charlie is. Still impressed? You can break those axioms all day long. Don't put something in the middle. There's many, many reasons to put something dead center in the middle of a composition.
Yeah, and Mary Pettis put a black sheep right in the middle. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
There's a black sheep, and it's in the middle, both horizontally and vertically. It's spot in the middle, what you should never do.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant, because of the asymmetry of everything else. And the first painting, or the second painting, which was I can't remember her name, it was the train depot.
The train depot. Mm-hmm.
The right-hand side of the tower is the center line, but you've got the positive of the train station coming off to the left, and you've got the negative of the space next to the train station off to the right. And that central thing, which you should never do, becomes really powerful because it draws attention to asymmetry.
Mm-hmm.
So it works really well.
Yeah,
when you
it becomes a keel to the composition. There are so many visual mechanisms we can use. I always, again, I'm referencing my students, I say, unless we decide to start painting on trapezoids and rhombuses and things like that, we are dedicated to a rectangle of one kind or another. And where can you go in that rectangle to create whatever dynamic it is you're interested in?
One last thing, just looking at Foulage, which is immediately to your right there.
Yep.
Basically, her layout of that painting is very, very similar to the layout of my painting. That there is that divisor in the center, and there's kind of an X shape on the right hand, and on the right hand half, and there's an openness on the left hand half, on both.
Oh yes, right, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
They're successful. I mean, look at
Yeah, exactly.
lots of rules can be broken. It's in the hands of a knowledgeable practitioner. Oh yes, sorry.
Of the artist here in this room, of the fine artist in this room, you know, when you go out and paint something, you're inspired by this thing to paint. And I understand as a judge, taking all of these elements and figuring all of this stuff out, do you actually do all of that? Do you think, okay, these are squares and this is this composition? I mean, it looks like you lose some of the spontaneity.
No, we do, or we just sense it needs a change.
Okay, so
We
you
may not-
change it to
Yeah,
that.
we may not mentally know, you just sense that this has to be moved, shifted, changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know the rules enough that you don't think about it anymore.
There you go.
Got it.
It just becomes innate.
What she
Yeah.
said.
And I think we'll also, when we're composing, that's how we compose. We see that strength, as opposed to looking at a thing and say, I'm going to do a painting of that thing.
Yeah.
Right.
You're seeing the
Shapes
thing in the landscape, in the world, thinking about a rectangle, and that's how you compose. And it's about that comfort with the ideas of diagonal and center and horizon and vertical. And
That's nice.
so I think that's
Yeah.
happening while we're thinking.
You can actually go back to that same spot and realize, no, I should do it this way this time. And then go back to that same spot and think, no, I'm going to do it different. That gets really fun.
And to that point, each artist will have their own sense of composition. For instance, Charlie, he likes to mentally verbalize when he's creating a painting, like when he was creating a painting out of the farm we were working at the other day. He's talking about one side being the machinery of man and the plane of the earth, and then he's also doing the push and he'll tend to do the push and pull left to right, dark and light, and then also when you were talking about verticals and horizontals.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlie tends to like that push and pull of the horizontal shift in his paintings, but other artists will like to have a rhythmic composition.
Mm-hmm.
So we each
Yeah,
have
we've got our
own
instincts and our tendencies. Yeah. Neil, did you have something?
Yeah, I want to say, I think an artist takes a big step when they go from painting a barn, a boat, to painting spatial relationships, color when you're thinking more in terms of the composition and the elements as opposed to the thing, the subject.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yes, when you stop saying that that's a red barn and start saying that it's a five-sided red object, that's when we take the familiar world and we translate it into artistic language. So, tree, circle, boat, parallelogram, you just begin to think and you shift your consciousness, so you're beginning to think in artistic dialogue as opposed to there's a difference between painting and sightseeing. So that's a huge step when that happens. What's that? 20 minutes left? Okay. No, I think I should be done by then. So one of the things I want to thank you for all those contributions. It really helps the conversation. And as I said, there's a lot of knowledge in this room, so it's wonderful to have it making a circle here. One thing for your edification regarding plein air painting. Plein air, I don't even like the word painting because it's not sufficient. Working plein air on location, it ranged, and from its very early stages, 200 or 300 years ago, they didn't go out to complete paintings. They went out with, on paper or canvas with just a couple of colors and some chalk and some Conti or some charcoal, and they were just making field studies. They hadn't developed the consciousness, the awareness, or the methods to complete paintings outside. That didn't happen for a couple of 100 years. So when I go to work outside, if I go on a painting trip, I bring my watercolor journal, and if I've just got time to do a small study of something and not think about composition, that's what I do. If I find something other than a lighting effect, if the weather's moving a lot, and I know I'm not going to be able to paint these skies, the clouds are moving at 25 miles an hour, I'll just do color studies. And then at some point, you bring it all to bear. As Thomas was saying, you go back and readdress it. And then finally, using the viewfinder and being dedicated to the rectangle is when you bring all of these efforts in to coalesce into a single work of art. So there's room for all of it. In fact, all of it's required. I saw the preparatory work of an Andrew Wyeth painting recently. The floor was covered, 35 or 40 sketches just to get one painting done. So,
I know you only have 20 minutes left, but I wanted to simply add that it was an eye-opener for me when my mentor told me, Thomas, your outdoor work will inform your indoor work, and your indoor work will inform your outdoor
absolutely.
work. They're not distinct.
Precisely. Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, Neil.
One comment about Andrew Wyeth. He wouldn't have time to do all those sketches if he was in a plein air competition.
You got a lot of guts there, buddy. Okay, Lauren, and you have to help me with the pronunciation. Sanskrit? Sanskrit? Sansar. Forgive me. Couldn't quite read that here. My apologies for that. Sunrise over the cotton field. This is has such a traditional Hudson River plein air look to the painting. It's got so much color restraint. These are the comments I made, and they tie into some of one of the things we were just talking about. She centered the sunrise, but countered it with the thirds rule. The thirds rule is a mechanism that we use, for those of you who are collectors, dividing a space into thirds, either a third here and a third here, or a third that way and a third that way. Wherever those thirds intersect are effective places to place an important part of the composition. It's also referred to as a variation of it is the golden mean. There's dynamic symmetry. There's a lot of these systems that have been developed and recognized. For the sake of this conversation, we'll just speak of the thirds rule. Those intersecting points are called the eyes of the canvas. It's where the eye goes to. So this is divided just about in half this way, and this is centered right here in the middle. But there's a couple dynamics that she used. One is the strong perspective on this roadway. The end of that road line's right up with that. It's what I call an implied vertical, and it arrests the movement across the picture. This side of the road is lined up right about with that the windmill right there. So even though there's a long sweep across this picture, she has lined these points up where the painting will give it very subtle. You don't see this stuff unless you pick it apart, but it holds the painting together. Let's see. Yeah, the perspective lines, where did I go from here? So this is my second observation. For a small painting, it is extremely spacious, and it is paying homage to the beginning of a day. And because of that, putting something right in the middle, honoring it, making it iconic, makes psychological sense to place it right there. The painting also has an appropriate division between the spacious, atmospheric, luminous sky and the temporal plane of the earth. So it's really a single moment. It also almost has a prayer-like quality. in my observation, because of the honor it's giving that glow. What's very interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to double check. This area of the brightest sunlight is the white canvas, is the white panel. So there's no paint applied from what I can tell. Am I correct in that? Wherever you are? Oh, she's not here. Oh. So yeah, then I'll stand by my statement. There's no paint. Anyway, very, very simple, spacious. There's a lot of purpose in that painting. So now we're going to go to. Oh, I got a few more to go through. I'll pick up the pace here a little bit.
No, just go along.
So Jill is a shy painter. Has to be drawn out. Her paintings have so much strength and excitement in them. So my comments on Texas Ribbon is the painting is based on a biased palette, suggesting a certain type of weather, and at the same time showing color dialogue, another very important component in what we do. And when you can link a feature of the subject that you're painting with an artistic method, the painting really begins to have great strength and authenticity. And the painting is built upon rhythm, pattern, strong aggressive brushwork that show the rugged nature of the land, and the technique draws out a feeling of empathy for the land. So there's something very visceral and personal about the way that Jill approaches the land. She tells us how she feels emotionally about her subject matter. By contrast, I would say that I'm not nearly as gestural or expressive. It's what it is that makes this whole thing so great, that each of us has our own approach. The rhythm and pattern is pretty obvious, and what I meant by a biased color palette is there are not a lot of reds. There's not a full spectrum in this picture. It's all dedicated to these spots of blue and their cadence as they go back into the distance. So there's the repetition, but the variation therein. And then they're coupled with these soft but lime greens. So that's an analogous color scheme to some degree. And then they're all balanced out with these more neutral tones in between. So there are feature colors in the landscape and there are subordinate colors in the landscape. The subordinate colors are the hardest ones to find. They're the mysterious colors. And those are the ones that will often be the muscle of the painting. They're not the punctuation marks, but those are the things that will set the general tone for the picture. And Jill, I think, is extremely effective, not only at her muscular brushwork, but also at her emotional excitement, but also her ability to spot these tones in between. It's a very intelligent painting. So look at this shape. Look at that shape. That's a lot of roadway. That's recessive perspective, and it's not easy to do when you're going down a bluff and then up another hill. It has to be very, very carefully observed and measured to get the illusion. So this painting has a juxtaposition of two elements. It's got surface fascination and a lot of paint excitement, and it still hosts an illusion. I've described representational painting as a two-dimensional object that hosts a three-dimensional illusion, and that's what this painting is.
And it carries across the room.
Carrying power is really something.
You come in a room and it pulls you from 100 feet
Yeah.
away. You know, it's...
Yeah, it's got great, a lot, it's got, the carrying power, due to its arrangement and the graphic structure in it.
It also breaks a cardinal rule in landscape painting of, warm colors come forward, cool colors recede. This one breaks that rule.
It does, and it gets, that's another misnomer, that there's never cool colors in the distance. That was rather rude.
No, that worked.
Not bad for first alternate. He's got 3.
Yeah. I hear he's in town. In case one of us goes down.
So, West Texas breeze. By the way, congratulations to all your collectors who own these paintings. So this painting has a strong lead-in, and it's coupled. That strong lead-in, which is It shows much better here. It's much softer here. This is far too harsh, but we'll discuss it up here. All of these lines are the lead into the picture. And none of the values down here in the original are as dark as they are there. So there's a strong lead-in into the painting, but it's coupled with soft edges, so you don't get arrested there. Hard edges will stop the eye, soft edges allow the eye to keep moving. And where am I? So with the soft, let me go back here, pardon me for one second, a little switch on my page here. So the soft edges also help create a softness to the light. On a crystal clear day when there's a very, very strong sun, particularly in the winter months, you'll get edges on shadows that you could cut yourself on. But this one has a real softness to it. So therein lies a portrayal of that type of day. And also the nature of the terrain as well. So this is an intimate scene. It doesn't show the entirety of the trees. It shows where the trees settle into the shadow area. And then it's featuring these what appear to be prickly pear right in this area, right here. So this area right here is the area of intimacy. We're not seeing the crown of the tree. He's not talking to us about the open field. That cropping selection process is what created this intimate feeling. Walking up to this tree and perhaps a good place to take a nap. So most of this is a lead-in into this little intimate relationship that's going on here. So this is up the center of the picture. These two trees lean off to the left side. That distant grouping lean off to the right side. And with that, therein balances the picture. He's also got one of those two trees which is much darker than the other. So that takes out that pairing again, that homeostasis. So there's another edict, if you will, strong side, weak side. Used a lot in portraiture. Strong side of a highlight, soft in the shadows, or vice versa. So by doing that, he is allowing some refracted light to float around those. Those of you who paint know John Carlson was always talking about the refraction of light going around an object like a tree trunk. And that's well done there. Again, a limited palette, which really create a mood and a tone in the scene. There aren't many places that I've been in the country that show a full spectrum of color. If I've been painting in Utah, that's got its own chromatic identity. Maine certainly does. Chesapeake is pretty much green, and then they have some green, and on top of that, there's some green. There's usually theme colors geographically around the country. And I don't know this area well enough to say, but that seems like it feels like the area. Another good reason to draw aside. Okay, here we go. Let's keep moving here. So I don't want to slight anybody. But so this is quite a painting. And if you study color, you know that we have the spectrum. It goes from ultraviolet to infrared. One end you got purple, and the other end you got yellow, and all the colors in between. And if you make a circle out of those things, we call a color wheel, and opposites on a color wheel are called complementary colors. And the complements of blue and orange are what are featured in this picture. And that creates excitement and a visual vibration in the scene. So just right off the bat, the painting evokes a lot of mood and a lot of energy. And the colored dialogue in this picture is pretty interesting. And over here, which is primarily a warm facade, he puts that blue window. Over here in the original, which has a real green cast to it, he puts that bright yellow window. So you're connecting these two things by balancing. Just that little touch alone is an important component in that picture. I've done a lot of architectural subjects in my life, and I can tell you doing a row of windows like that is very difficult. They either look like they're cut out and stuck on, or they're stiff, they don't go back in distance. It's such a deft mark that you have to make in sequence and repetition to get that facade to sit the way it does. And clearly this, obviously, all of this illuminated activity down here contrasted with the Prussian blue sky. It's just, and again, here's dimension and here's silhouette. Those trees are nothing more than silhouettes to set the middle ground and push the building behind it. So it's really well orchestrated, but these little punctuations in particular were the ones that really struck me, and where he decided to place lights and where they weren't. Well done painting. Oh, almost missed one important. This has 3-point perspective in it. So 2-point perspective we're familiar with. These lines are going off here into the horizon, and we're almost at street level, eye level, so that line's going to go out and hit a vanishing point right out there. There's another one heading way off into the distance, and it's going to take that side and bring that out to a vanishing point. So there's 2-point perspective. The 3rd-point perspective are these lines ascending up off the top, where the building gets smaller as it descends. And that happens with very large objects when you're standing in front of them. So there's a vanishing point way up in the zenith of the sky somewhere. And what that does is it creates majesty and dignity to the building. So it's a subtle thing, but it's very important that it's there. Zufar. Zufar is a real poet with his paintbrush. In fact, that's what I just said. This painting is extremely poetic, and through the color use and the brush marks. The color relationships, both contrasting and analogous color schemes, are present. I'll go through my list and then point them out. The placement of the elements gives the painting a balance, and the painting is heightened by vertical relationship with the end of the marsh and the windmill. Also, the subtle color of the sky is very important. So, this is a long horizontal. I won't discuss them in sequence. I'll just touch upon them. This is obviously a very long horizontal subject matter. But if you'll note, the marsh ends right about here, and it's right under the windmill. So there's a long space here that opens that composition up. You don't go flying across it. You've got a lot of space, and it increases the depth of field. So here he's got analogous color schemes, the greens and the blues. But he's also got these blues against these purple blues against these earth yellows. So here's something that's somewhat analogous. Here's a complementary color scheme. Here's something analogous. So his placement of all of these marks, and it's really worth taking a close look at Zufar's paintings because they're known for their brush marks. His mark making is exquisite. It's not literal, but it's descriptive. And it just suspends itself in this place that is just so poetic. Now, we were talking earlier about, do you plan all this stuff out in a painting or not? I tend to be pretty intentional and I plan my paintings, but you can also be an intuitive painting, as Thomas said. Just do it by feel. And so there's not a lot of strict anatomy in this picture, but his placement of those elements just sets the scene. And doing things like that, moving this over this far, these reflective areas, every mark that he makes in this painting contributes to the whole of the scene. Really beautiful, pleasing painting.
Can I just say how jaw-droppingly good that windmill is? Or that?
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly good. And they're marks. Zufar's calligraphy is exquisite. And you're right, the handling of that windmill is second to none. So, next one. Ready to sail? So painting has a great transformative power to it. One of the things it can do is it can take prosaic, ordinary things and give them importance and dignity. And that's what Zufar did, I believe, in this picture. You can elevate the ordinary to a higher level of attention. And that's what I believe Zufar did. That's not a particularly appealing boat. It's not in a particularly interesting spot. It's as though he turned the corner and saw it, but because of his transformative ability with his brush and his calligraphy, he took this ordinary fiberglass sailboat. I hope the owner isn't here. If they are, it's a lovely craft. Yeah, I keep it covered all the time. He just took something every day and painted an exquisite little vignette scene out of it. And that's one of the things that painting has the power to do, just like literature has the power to do it. You select the right number of words, you place them in the right sequence, and you can make a beautiful statement. Well, that's what Zufar did in this picture. He punched the heck out of that green on the lawn right there. And that's exciting. That's when you take the natural palette and just push it out so that it begins to take on a vibrancy or some emotional content. Okay?
I'd say to push colors makings that,
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, I've watched him paint, and a few times we painted together. He's quite a painter. And so then besides, I don't think I'm talking out of school, we were together up in Maine, staying at a house together with a few other artists, and then mixed company, and after a day of painting, and he did a couple of beauties, he came in and he took his guitar out and he said, "I'm sorry, I can only sing ballads in Russian." Come on, you give us a break here. Okay, where are we? Tara.